Okay, perfect. Thanks for your questions. Yeah, so this is going to be a pretty casual session. There's only 14 people online, so you'll have lots and lots of time to ask your individual questions. I'm just going to answer Keisha's question because she had emailed me something earlier, but then I'll leave it open for everyone to ask questions. Yeah. Okay, Keisha, you're here, right? Yes, I admitted you. Okay, perfect. Okay, so Keisha's question is, can you explain the sliding scale? So I wanted to actually build a sliding scale today, and I'll probably put it in one of my cheat sheets afterwards. So you guys can see my screen, right? My Word document? Give me a fun.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So, okay. So let's do this sample question. Um, yeah. Oh, so you guys can't see this, but I have to like admit people in and make sure that they're muted. So just give me a second to admit all these people. There's all this chat stuff that I have to look after too. Okay, perfect. Okay, so Keisha's question was on a sliding scale. So let's do a sliding scale together and figure out how it works. So let's use a really simple example. Let's go with Bob here. He takes 10 units of Apidra, which is a rapid-acting insulin, and then 20 units of Tresiba, which is one of the long-acting analogs. He has the same thing every day. He has 30 grams of carbs with breakfast, 45 with lunch, and 60 with supper. So if you look at, I have an insulin calculation cheat sheet, but sorry, just have to mute people. Um, but and which you can take a look at. But let's do do some calculations here. I did some previous calculations. So if you look at Bob's total daily dose, he's taking 10 with each meal, so that's 30 plus 20 from the Tresiba, so that his total daily dose is actually 50. So for his insulin to carb ratio, just have to admit Noella and Sonia here. 1 second. Okay, perfect. So if you look at his insulin to carb ratio, we'd go 500 divided by 50. And when I'm nervous, I can't do math. 10. So, oops, kg. Okay, so that's 10. So that means that his insulin to carb ratio is that he has to take 1 unit for every 10 grams of carbs. And then let's look at his insulin sensitivity factor. So that's also divided by 50, which is his total daily dose. So 100 divided by 50 is 2. That means 1 unit will bring him down 2 millimoles per liter. So let's calculate this out. So let's assume that Noella can't hear, but I believe everyone else can. So maybe it's on your side. Okay, so let's see here. So, okay, so let's calculate out his stuff. So we want him to be between 4 and 7 most of the time. So when he has his breakfast, he's having 30 grams of carbs. So we know that his insulin to carb ratio is 1 to 10. So that's 10, 20, 30. So that's 3 units here. And then that should keep him between 4 and 7 after he has his 30 grams of carbs. Then for lunch, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, and then we round down. So that's 4 units of lunch. And then with supper, it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it's 6 here. If he's below 4 millimoles per liter, you would say like don't take insulin, treat the low, have 15 grams of carbs afterwards, etc., as per the hypoglycemia chapter. So in all of these ones, it'd be treat low. Someone's unmuted. Okay, so treat low. So now what happens to build the rest of the sliding scale? We have to look at his insulin sensitivity factor. So we know that 1 unit will bring him down 2. So that means if he's at 9, it'll bring him back down to 7. So if he's above target, say 7.1 to 9, we know that 1 unit will bring him down 8, 7. He'll bring him down 2. So in this case, it's 4, and then we have 4 for lunch, so this is 5, and now this is 7. And then let's say he's at 11, so 9.1 to 11. Because we know that 11 minus 2 is 9, then minus 2 is 7, and that will bring him down to target. So in this case, it's 5, 6, and then 8. Whoops, 8. And then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You can build the rest of the sliding scale, and there you have it. That's the way you would build a sliding scale for a patient. Let's see here. Keisha, does that answer your question?
Yes, so the 4 and 6, you just like took it by your own, just for the calculation. Like I got the 3 units, why you put the 3 here.
Okay.
But for the 4 and 6, so
Okay.
why?
So because
Because of the 45 gram. Okay.
Yeah, but we round down for the 45 because for insulin we'd rather them be a little bit high than a little bit low. So that's why there's 4, not 5. And then 10 divided by 6 is 6 for here.
Yeah, got it.
Perfect. Okay. Any other questions with that sliding scale?
Sorry, this is Martha. Thank you so much, Edmund. I have a question regarding this picture.
Sure.
Just to clarify, so in the first sentence it mentioned Bob uses 10 units of Apidra. So I think that's a prescription. He doesn't use that unless needed, right?
No, that's...
Or this is on top of the 10 units?
This is on top of the 10 units.
Okay.
Oh, you're right. Oh, you're right, actually. Sorry, I put that in just to create the total daily dose. But you are 100% right. I just realized that this doesn't quite work.
Yeah, so I was kind of
Yes,
confused. So
you're totally right. Because I just put that in there for the totally, but I just realized that this this calculation doesn't work. Let's just say he just takes 50 of Tresiba.
Yeah, so that's easier to then
there we go.
do the calculation. Yes, thank you.
Sorry, you're 100% right. I totally didn't see that.
Thank you.
Yes. Okay, now that makes sense. Now you take 3 and 4 and 6 and stuff like that. So yeah, that's a way you would calculate kind of a sliding scale for your patient. Okay.
Hi, Esmond.
Hi.
Hi, Kasia. Yes. Just sorry, can you just repeat how you got like from 7.1 to 9? Why is it 7.1 to 9? Like,
sure.
And how did you get the 4? Just
like this 4 or like this 4?
No. Like, so I understand the 4 to 7 and then 7.1 to 9. Like, why is it 7.1 to 9? Like, why is the range?
Sure.
And how did you tell?
That's a good question. So, okay, now if he's between 4 and 7, we know that just 3 units will cover his 30 grams, right?
Okay.
So afterwards, he should take 3 units and he'll go back down to 7. He'll probably rise a little bit and then come back down to 7, right?
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So, but let's say he's higher. Let's say he's a 9. We know that 1 unit will bring him down 2, right? So this 9, so this 9 minus 2 will equal 7.
Right.
And that will bring him down back to target. Oops, there's a whole bunch of people I need to admit. 1 second. Oops, sorry, I muted you. Feel free to unmute yourself. I'm just admitting all these people. Okay. So does that make sense, Kasia? Like where I got this from? Because if he's above target, we need a little bit extra to bring him back into target. So that's why, and we know that 1 unit, his insulin sensitivity factor is 2. So 1 unit will bring him down back from 9 to 7. And then, or if he's higher, like 11, then it'll be 11 minus 2, which is 9, which is 1 unit. And then another minus 2 will be down to 7, and then he's back at target.
So Esmond, if his insulin sensitivity factor was say 3, your scale would then be 7.1 to 10. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep, that's absolutely right. So let's do here. Let's change around the numbers a little bit. Let's say he uses 100 units. Then it'd be 500 divided by 100. So then this would be 5, and then this would be 1. I have to admit Marianne. Okay, so let's do it this way. So let's say he's using 100. So in this case, we would have to recalculate his insulin carb ratio. So 30 grams of carbs, but 1 unit only covers 5 carbs. So now this becomes 6. Then with the 45, it evenly divides into 9. We don't need to round down or anything like that. And then with 60, why am I so bad at math right now? Sorry, 12. Anyway, so let me get rid of these numbers just to avoid confusion. Okay, so now we know his ISF is just 1. 1 unit brings him down 1. So if we use the same thing, 7.1 to 9, 9 doesn't work because if he took 1 extra unit, 9 would only bring him down to 8. So now this scale becomes 9.1 to 8, and this becomes 8.1 to 9. Because he needs, if he had his regular breakfast, he would need 6 to cover the 30. And then he needs 1 extra if he's at 8 to bring him down to 7. Or if he's at 9, he needs 2 extra to bring him down to 7. And then the base of 6 for his 30 grams of carbohydrate. And same thing over here. Yeah. So this is like a rough way to build a sliding scale for your patient. Like if you have some real life data, that would be the best thing to base it off of. If like, let's say they have the same thing with breakfast and it's 40 grams and it's 4, and he takes 4 units and it works, then you know his insulin to carb ratio is 1 to 10. Again, this calculation here is just kind of like a very rough estimate, a very rough starting point. If you have no other information, this is then if you have no other information, then you can use this. But if you have some real life information, that'd be better to use. Yeah. So yeah, any other questions about that? Okay. So I believe that was the only questions sent in. Yeah. So yeah, you are, and this is a very casual session. You feel free to come and leave as you please. I'm going to go over 3 tips. I mentioned them in the last session, but I'll just repeat them again, and then I'll open up to questions. So there's 3 kind of like for people asking for refunds, I kind of go over what they went wrong, what they did well, and what they didn't well. I kind of review the letter that they get. And I find that there's 3 traits among people who don't pass the exam. So the first one is changing their answer often. If possible, just go with your first answer and stick with it. I think that's the best way to do it. Your gut instinct is probably right most of the time. Second is poor time management. So remember on the exam, there's 165 questions, but remember that 25 of them are so-called pilot questions. So these are questions that they're not sure if it's a good question or not. They just want to test to see if it makes sense. And so it might not be worded greatly or it might be confusing. But even if you spent like all 3 hours answering that one pilot question, you would still get exactly 0 points. Whether you get the question right or whether you get the question wrong, you get 0 points for the pilot questions. So it's really important not to kind of get stuck on one question or panic about one question. It might be a pilot question. Don't waste your time on it. Just mark it to come back to at the end and then continue on with the test. And the third item is, and I don't know why some students do this, but they have this weird fantasy thinking. So for example, it'll say, the question will say, this person has type 1 diabetes. But in their mind, it's like, oh, if they have type 1 diabetes, they must be young. And then if they're young, they must live in Toronto or something. And if they live in Toronto, they must be a vegetarian. And if they're a vegetarian, they must have a sensitive stomach. So you can't use metformin or GLP-1s. And it just says they have type 1 diabetes. What, like, some people think, oh, there's type 2. They must be over 40, therefore they need a statin. No, like if it says type 2, it could be a child with type 2. It could be 100-year-old with type 2. So don't, whatever the question says is what it says, and you can't make these giant assumptions. So just read the question slowly and try to catch yourself if you're making these odd assumptions. Yeah. Okay. Can you show us the waist circumference table? I saw somewhere with USA and Canada populations too, but I can't find it now. I can definitely look it up for you. Sure, we can take a look at that right now. Does anyone know where the waist circumference table is? I assume it's the obesity chapter.
Yeah, I think it's in weight management.
Yeah, so it's just right here. Perfect. Yeah, I know Noella has the things right there. So thank you. Okay. Oh, here there's some questions here.
Yeah, I have a question.
Yes, Nikolai, what's up?
Yeah, question about screening child with type 1.
Child with type 1. Okay.
Yeah, dyslipidemia. So my question is, yeah, it's says, and you did on your sheet, delay screening until metabolic stable. Screen at 12 and 17 years of age. So my question is, if a person diagnosed 14 years old, we should not check, we should wait until she or he turns 17?
Correct. Yes, that's how I would interpret it.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not says he's between. It's at 12 or 17. If, for example, we diagnose person with 15 years old, stable, we should not check. We should not check lipids. We should wait till 17. Correct?
That's how I would interpret it right now. I will double check for you, but yeah, that's how I would interpret it.
Okay. All right. It means, and here is if metabolic is stable.
Correct.
But if not stable,
you would delay screening. So when they're metabolically unstable, that means they have like possibly like ketosis and stuff like that. So you wouldn't, yeah, you would delay until that's all stabilized first.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Cindy, are there any methods for making an insulin sliding scale? If a patient brings a sliding scale from a doctor, can we calculate the ICR and ISF backwards? You can. So let me show you how to do that. So let's say a patient comes to you with, okay, let's say Bob comes to you with this. So from this, you know that, okay, 4 to 7, he takes 6 units for 30 grams of carbohydrate. So then you can calculate that his ICR is 5. It's also important to note that some people have different, in real life, I don't think they'll do this on the test, but in real life, some people have different insulin to carb ratios for different meals. Some people just need more insulin in the day and less in the night, or vice versa. And so you could reverse calculate that. Also from this, you can see that, okay, for every 1, they're going up by 1. That means that their insulin sensitivity factor is 1. So yeah. Yeah, so I hope that answers your question, Cindy. I'm just looking at the chat right now. And if it doesn't, feel free to unmute and we can explore it more. Okay. There was a question on practice tests. So I'm reading Mandy's question now. There was a question on practice tests regarding which patient is most sensitive. They've given ISF and ICR. Okay, so what's your question, Mandy? There was also a carbohydrate exchange ratio. Yes. So, but I don't understand your question, Mandy.
Sorry, yes.
Hi.
So I could not understand how to calculate that. Given that carbohydrate exchange ratio, it was a little confusing. It was
Sure.
on few tests, like the practice exams.
Okay,
So I thought I'll ask you to show me how you did those.
sure. So let's talk about that. So a person's insulin sensitivity is large, like you can kind of get an idea about how much insulin they use. For example, if Bob uses 100 units of insulin, he's probably more insulin resistant than, say, Sally, who uses 10 units. Okay, so let's calculate the ratios for this. Let's compare Bob's versus Sally. So for Bob, his numbers would be 500 divided by 100. So that's, I'm sorry, I have to admit some people coming on Bueller. Okay, so his ratio is 5. So he takes 1 unit for 5. And again, for this, he takes his insulin sensitivity factor. It's 1. So let's compare him against Sally. So this is Bob. And then this is Sally, who uses much less insulin. So for her, it's divided by 10, so 50. So she uses 1 unit for 50 grams of carbs. Oh, someone's not muted. There we go. Whoops, did I ask mute the wrong person? Okay. So Sally takes 500 divided by 10, which is 50, and then 100 divided by 10, which is 1 to 10. So 1 unit drops Sally down 10, whereas for Bob, 1 unit only drops him down 1. So who is more sensitive to insulin here? So obviously it's Bob, because you have to give him 1 unit and he only drops down 1. Think of it this way. Say you're trying to push 2 people down a flight of stairs. If I put in 1 unit of force, I push Bob, let's say he's a sumo wrestler, he only goes down 1 step. But for Sally, if I push her with 1 unit of force, she falls down 10 steps. So who's more sensitive to my punch or my push? So obviously it's Bob. So for insulin exchange ratios, that's an old way of doing things. Some people like to think of insulin carb, they like to think of their insulin carb ratio in terms of exchanges. So let's say 15 gram, let's say 15 grams is equal to 1 exchange. Okay, some people like to think of like, okay, I take 1 unit for 1 slice of bread, 2 units for 2 slices of bread. It's not really common anymore, but this was an old system of using it. So if I've got 2 people who says, okay, let's say for let's say 15 now it doesn't have to be 15 grams. Some people will use like 30 grams or 45 grams. But let's say for this example, 15 grams is 1 exchange. One person uses 1 unit for an exchange, and another person uses 10 units for an exchange. Remember, in this example, exchange is 15 grams. So who would be more sensitive to insulin? Well, obviously this person. They only need to use 1 unit for exchange for 15 grams, whereas this person needs to use 10 units to bring down 15 grams of sugar, of carbohydrate back down to normal. Yeah, so does that make sense, Mandy?
Yes, it does. I could not figure out what is this exchange thing. Now it makes sense. Thank you.
It's just an old school way of calculating insulin to carb ratios. If you look in like the Libra meters and stuff like that, they'll ask you, do you want to measure things in grams or exchanges? And so that's what it's asking you.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you.
No problem.
Hi, Desmond. Before we leave this question, so ISF is if it's rapid acting insulin, then you use the 100 over, total daily dose, and if it's the regular Humulin R or whatever, you use
83.
83. So if somebody like in this question is just using long acting, why are we using the 100 over 8? like the 100 over total daily dose. What wouldn't it make more sense to use the 83 over the total daily dose?
That is a good question. Well, we're using a PEDRA to treat them, so we would use.
Oh, we
We-
are. Oh, I
yeah.
thought we said we weren't using a PEDRA. Okay, I missed that then.
That was in the previous example. Sorry,
Okay.
I'm trying to the examples are kind of blending together. But in this case, we are using a PEDRA to treat their insulin.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then let's just say for hypothetically that, forget this question, but hypothetically on the there's a question saying, oh, the patient's only on a deglutic or 80 units or whatever. So which ratio would you use that? The 100 over the TDD or the 83 over?
So this one doesn't, the insulin to carb ratio doesn't change. That one's just TDD. The ISF,
I'm talking about the ISF, sorry.
Yeah. So for the ISF, I would use whatever you're planning to put them on. So if you're planning to put them on a PEDRA, then or NovoRapid or Fiasp or one of those rapid acting insulins, I would use 100. And if you plan to use Humulin R or Toronto, you would use 83. You would probably never use Toronto or Humulin R in any case because it is more variable absorption. You have to take it 30 minutes before the meal. Rapid acting insulins have been shown to cause less lows.
Okay, but then how do you calculate ISF if the patient is only on basal insulin?
So you wouldn't then
Oh,
technically.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, this is just for the example to build this case.
Oh, I see.
Like let's say they're only on 100 units of Tresiba, then let's say a patient, Bob walked in, he's on 100 units of Tresiba and the doctor told you to put him on bolus insulin. So you'd probably use the standard like 4 units with whatever meal that you could start them on 1, you can start them on 2 or 3. Like there was one study that showed that for adding bolus insulin, the first bolus gives you the most benefit, and then the second gives you less, and then the third gives you even less. So typically I start my patients just on 1 bolus with their largest meal of the day typically. But let's say let's say he walks in, the doctor wants you to start him on all the meals. So you'd probably just put him on 4, you'd probably start him 2 to 4 units as per the guidelines. But even then you still have a clue. Like let's say he's on 100 units or 200 units, then you'd probably go with like 4 units because he's insulin resistant. But let's say for some reason Sally comes in and doctor says for whatever reason she needs bolus insulin, then I would actually probably go like 2 or maybe even 1 because I know that, because starting with her on 4, it'd be like 4, 4, 4, that's 12. That's way more than she's taking. I would afraid that she would go low. So even then you can use these kind of calculations as a guide to how much insulin you start a patient on.
But for exam purposes, if they told us they were just on basal, then you can't use this calculation.
Technically not.
Okay. All right. I guess if no one else has a question, I mean, there's actually some really good questions. There was one that came up, but I'll get to that one right now. So let's basically on talking about insulins, right? So on our one of the tables about what to add next. So let's say the patient doesn't have any other has chronic kidney disease or heart failure and had a heart attack. So they do qualify to get, either SGLT2 or or GLP, but they're already on basal, but they need more glycemic control. So would it be okay to answer a question saying they need more glycemic control, but they cannot afford any of these SGLT2s or GLPs? Could you just start them on the basal? Because they want you to do those others before you go to basal, right?
Yeah, like on exam, it'll say like patient is on a small pension or patient is using the food bank or something like that. So if there's an answer like start them on a GLP-1 or start them on an SGLT2, that's probably the wrong answer because those are expensive.
Right.
And also another thing to remember for the exam is that you know, just because it's covered, it's a national exam, there is no Alberta version, there is no Ontario version. Just because it's covered in your province doesn't mean it's covered in all provinces. So for example, Ozempic is covered in Alberta, but I can't assume that's covered in every other province. So maybe you're thinking, oh, well, I would just put them on Ozempic. In Alberta it's covered, so it'd be no problem. But you can't assume that. So it'd be like, oh, okay, then if I don't know what the coverage is, then you'd assume it's not covered.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, so I'm just gonna go to the chat now. I see there's a bunch of chat questions. Okay. Question, why does Actos cause bone issues but not Avandia? I'm not sure, to be honest. It's just a weird side effect of Actos. So Noella, question when ready. Noella, are you still here?
I am here.
Yeah,
Sorry.
hi, Noella. No worries.
Hi there. I'm sorry. I thought this was kind of a post-exam wrap-up because I wrote my exam and I realized that people haven't written their exam yet.
Oh,
So I will just use this opportunity to thank you for your course, and I hope you continue to do it because I may have to write it in another 5 years. But I've used your course for 3 exams now, and it's really, really helpful, really, really thorough, and I really appreciate it.
thank you, Noella. I really appreciate those kind comments. Thank you so much.
No problem.
Yeah.
I'll sign out.
Okay. Thank you again, Noella. I really appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Okay, bye-bye.
So I will be opening up the forum on Saturday at noon, and then you can post your comments there. Remember, you cannot post exact questions. We all signed the CDCB form where we can't discuss exact questions, but you can talk about the question in the exam in general. I'll be opening that up on Saturday to avoid any unfair advantages and stuff like that. Okay. Oopsies. Okay, so let's see. Hey, Nikolai.
No, I just maybe not related, just personal question. Did you try already to have exam online?
I have written it online.
And
I thought it was actually better than than in person. And so I think there's pros and cons. So in Calgary, sometimes in May there's blizzards. So there was one time where there was a blizzard going on the same day as the exam. So you're stressed about the exam and you have to drive all the way to the university and you're already stressed, but there's people, like whenever there's like no snow and then all of a sudden a lot of snow, people in Calgary drive like idiots. And so we had some summer weather and then it was snowy and then everyone was driving an idiot. You're stressed about the exam. And then at the university, you have to pay like $15 to park like half an hour away, and then you have to walk. And by the time you're in the exam, you're completely soaked, and I had to write the exam soaked. So, and then there's always some like annoying person with a squeaky eraser that sits beside me. I don't know who that person is, but so there's all these annoying things when coming to writing in person. Now, I'm good with technology, so all that technology stuff is easy for me. I understand that not everyone is good with technology, but I think you should try to use this home court advantage to your advantage. Like you can put something that's calming. Like if you find lavender calming, you should put some lavender candles about. If you find something that's comforting, like some picture of your wife or kids or whatever, you should put that around just to calm yourself down. Or if you're a spiritual person and there's like a Buddha statue where you can do deep breathing for 7 breaths and it keeps you calm, then do that. Like when you're in science theaters at the University of Calgary, it's like that 3x3 desk and you're soaking wet and you have to write the exam on it. It's not exactly 100% comfortable either. So I actually prefer to write it in person. But I know that technology-wise, it's kind of scary, but those are my thoughts.
And since we're talking about the exam, can I quickly ask you, so I find the instructions a little bit confusing. So we did get the link today for the Google Meet, but then on the instruction that we received prior, they're talking about entering the code. I don't know if you're able to walk through the steps. So once we connect with the proctor, in terms of connecting to that screen, which they gave us the trial link for, I don't see any link and I don't see any code in the email.
Sorry, quick question. Did you get the link for tomorrow's exam?
Yeah, I'm writing tomorrow, so I got mine.
So I'm writing tomorrow. I didn't get any.
Oh no.
Let me double check my email. Thank you.
No, I write tomorrow, but I've got link yesterday.
Okay.
So that link is for the not the exam. That's for the connection for Semper.
Proctor.
Oh,
Yeah.
right.
So that one I
okay.
got. Yes, thank you.
I just wanted to kind of confirm, once we connect with the proctor, they're the one who will take us to some sort of a link to connect to the exam screen.
Yeah. Yes, I
Mhm.
think so.
Okay.
Okay.
And Esmond, every time when you leave room, you should ask permission, go to washroom. And when you come back, you should inform I'm back or what? Or you just come and that's it?
I can't comment about this year's exam. This year is the first time they've used that Google Meet. So I've never used Google Meet on an exam before. But yeah, so I don't know anything about that part. You are the first people who are using it. But for me, I don't think I had to tell them I had to go to the washroom when I wrote it online. So
you didn't let them know.
I don't think I needed to.
Okay,
I would double, I would double check though.
Okay, they sent an instruction, you should inform.
Okay, so then that's different then. For the time that I wrote it like 3 years ago, they didn't have Google Meet and I could just use the washroom.
Okay, I got it.
Yeah. So I'm not writing this year, so I can't help you with those guys. And I don't want to give you old instructions in case, like for example, like for mine, I was allowed to just use the washroom, but now apparently you have to ask for permission.
And you didn't use a calculator before, right?
Correct. We didn't have a calculator.
Now we're gonna have.
Yes, I believe you can use the Top Hat calculator, which is nice. I do remember a time where there was a question that was like 2, 4, 6, and I tried to calculate it using long division and I got like 0.1 or something like that. So obviously I got that question wrong.
I see. Okay. Yeah.
So I'm just going to mute some people unless they have any questions. And then I'm just going to go back to the chat and go through whatever questions people have. Okay. So Josephine asks, Diabetes Canada, I assume carbohydrate sheet says 2/3 cup is 15 grams of carbohydrate and 2/3 cup of flavored yogurt is 15 grams. While the carb count, yes. So that one's kind of confusing. Yes. So basically one source, the Diabetes Canada sheet is saying one thing, and then the Beyond the Basics one is saying another thing. So sometimes on the exam, it'll actually say, according to the Beyond the Basics sheet, how much is 15 grams of carbs. So then you know to follow the Beyond the Basics. That one's a really tough one. Someone asked that in the exam forum. And so for the purposes of the exam, I would say, like, if they're asking for treatment of hypoglycemia, use the 2/3. But if they're asking for carbs, then actually use the Beyond the Basics. I know that's confusing, but I don't have an answer. That's what I would do for the exam. And it was asked in the exam form already, so you can Google that and find out more details. Okay. So KG asks, during DKA, why does administering insulin first as opposed to IV fluids increase risk for cerebral edema? So for that question, first of all, that only typically happens to kids. So for kids, their brain is like this big, but their skull is like this big. So there's not a lot of room. For adults, like apparently our brain is like this big, but our skull is this big. So we have more room. So insulin drives fluids into cells. So think about it. If you've got a cell and there's no insulin, then it's not intaking any glucose. But as soon as you administer insulin, insulin comes in and it drags along, potassium and stuff like that. And so there's an osmotic pressure to go into the cell. And so that expands. And so if you give a child IV insulin first, their brain starts to expand. But because their brain is this big, but their skull is only this big, there's no room to expand. And cerebral edema can actually be fatal. So in those cases, you should give IV fluids first. Now, I just know that because that's a question that seems to show up on the exam a lot. I don't have any emergency experience, so I can't expand upon it any further. Dr. Peterson did talk about that a little bit, but in general, you would use, for children, you would use IV fluids first, then insulin. For adults, it matters less. Okay, so the next question on the chat is from Ikeen. Recommendation 17B on chapter 13, 2020 update. It says insulin should be decreased or held if oral intake is reduced. As per sick day, is insulin and maglitides listed as a part of SADMANS now? So maglitides like glucanorm are part of SADMANS now. There was a new SADMANS handout that included glucanorm, but I don't believe, let me just take a look at it in more detail. But typically insulin should not be held even if their oral intake is low. Like you wouldn't use like Novorapid or anything like that, but you would still give them basal insulin. So let me just take a look at that right now. So 17B. Okay, let me just make this bigger. Okay. Insulin and insulin secretor should be decreased or held to reduce if oral intake is reduced. And is this type 2? Yeah, so that's for type 2 diabetes. For type 1, you would never hold it. And I would say that this would mostly be for like bolus insulin. You would still probably go with the basal insulin. Typically for SADMANS, you'd be recommending that they have fluids containing carbohydrate if they can't eat. So insulin is definitely not part of SADMANS, as this is only for type 2 diabetes, but maglitides are a part of SADMANS now. Great question, Akeen. Okay, so I'm moving down.
Hi, sorry, before you go on, can I just ask, because I'm the one that asked the question. How are you, Esmond?
Oh, hi, Akeen. How are you doing?
Good. So now my question is, I was the one that posted the question, and I'm hearing you saying that SADMANS is only for type 1?
No, so SADMANS is for both, but you can see here that it's saying hold insulin for type 2. So in type 1, you would never hold insulin. And in general, you would still, like
Right.
In general, yeah.
Okay, so for sick day medication list is for both, right? For both type 1 and type 2. It doesn't matter. Right. So I'm just wondering, because if in the exams tomorrow, the question about SADMANS comes up and insulin is part of the options and maglitide is on it, like what do we do? And it says which one except.
Okay, so insulin would definitely not be part of SADMANS, and then maglitides would definitely be part of SADMANS.
Okay, so just ignore this 17B for the exam?
Well, you don't ignore, like, again, I think now, so this is a grade D consensus. So for type 2, I think it's referring mostly to like bolus insulin. In most cases, you would still give basal insulin.
Okay. All right, sounds good. It's just quite confusing, but no, thank you.
So I missed repaglinide. We should stop, correct? And miglitinin's we should stop both, correct?
Correct. So here, let me just show you quickly. In my, where is it? Appendices. Okay. So that's a new one. Okay. So this is the old SADMANS right here, Appendix A. If you look here, here's the new SADMANS. And if you take a look at this, you can see that repaglinide gluconorm is right there.
Glyburide
is a sulfonylurea.
Right. Okay.
But
Glucagon
repaglinide is a meglitide.
It's there.
Yeah.
What? Okay, interesting. So I can find there on your.
Yeah,
I didn't see. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Nope, but that's a great question. Great question, Zakeen. Great question, Nikolai. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to the chat right now. Cindy's asking, I noticed there are education research competencies on the exam. Can you briefly review some highlights from these resources? Okay, Cindy, were you here for the last Q&A? I just want to make sure I don't go over stuff that you've already heard for yesterday's Q&A.
Hi, Esmond.
Hi, Cindy.
I'm here for the last Q&A, and I don't have a very specific question about the education research competency. I just found how some of these questions are based on resources that are separate from the guidelines. And that wasn't the focus of my study. I previously thought these type of questions would be the easier ones and the ones that you can kind of just guess based on what's making sense. But sometimes I think we still need to study for them and not get those questions wrong just because we think they are an easier domain. So I was just wondering if you can review some highlights from these resources.
Sure.
I also don't have access to the how-to of patient education book you recommended.
Okay.
Yeah, so just want to hear some of your highlights.
Sure. So most of this is concentrated in chapters 6 and 7 that talks about, you know, like patient education, stuff like that. You can also find resources in my after practice exam review, which is right here. The How to Patient Education is a pretty short book. I think it's like $25 if you really struggle with this area. These are the types of learning, and I've added some links to the Kolb's learning styles. I don't know if this will show up on exam. She'll just talk about it because it's kind of confusing, and so you get one of these questions and you remember it, but there was only one question on it on the exam. So yeah. So those would be the highlights. Were you looking for something else?
No, I don't have a specific question. I was just wondering if you know there are certain things that are more likely to come up on the exam. But thank you for reviewing those resources.
Sure. Oh, and there's one last one too. If you look at, because research is one of the questions, and so I do have a like if you look at the statistics and studies / research cheat sheet, it does have a number of the studies like ACCORD and stuff like that, and the UKPDS and the DCCT. So this would be another resources to study off for that research competency question.
Do you think we should be memorizing the percentages for these studies?
I believe it showed up once in my exam, so possibly. I know it's a lot to memorize, but that's a tough question to ask. Like last year, I think someone mentioned that they didn't have any UKPDS or DCCT questions, but that doesn't mean it won't show up on your test. I believe there was one question on it when I wrote 3 years ago. They did ask about these studies, but for these studies, you don't have to memorize them. You just have to know the class effect. Like you need to know that DPP-4 in general, they didn't have any CV benefit. For the GLP-1s, not all of them showed CV benefit, just Victoza, Ozempic, Trulicity. For the SGLT2s, they all showed benefit for renal function and things like that. So you don't have to memorize you don't have to memorize the name, like you don't have to memorize like who was in the trial, how many patients, stuff like that. To this today trial, I would memorize the numbers for this one. This seems to this showed up on my exam too, and I think last year it showed up or something like that. But this one, the today trial does seem to show up a lot. It's basically the landmark trial for young people with diabetes, so that's why it's important. It's like the UK PDS of young people. So definitely I would look at that. I don't know if I would memorize these numbers because I don't know if this will show up, but you know, if you have extra memory or you're concerned about that competency, then yes, I would memorize these. And then all these statistics and stuff like that are part of that competency too.
Esmond, sorry, a question regarding studies. I'm not sure if I'm recalling it correctly or not. One of the question in your exams practice question was also there was a study on insulin to prevent diabetes. Is that correct?
There was, I believe, like that isn't the prevention one. That's for type 1, I believe. And it didn't work
So that
out.
was like, I think for type 1, we couldn't do anything to prevent that. But this one,
Correct.
the questions that shows weight management, metformin, and these kind of things shows like prevention benefits. And also one of the items was insulin, which you were highlighting that as another option. Pod correct answer.
So I don't want to talk about my practice questions on this Q&A. This will go up on YouTube. If you have a specific question, I'm happy to answer it, but just email it to me. But I can say, like, I believe that question was looking at the prevention of diabetes. And so what you need to know for that is that type 1, there's nothing we can do. But for type 2, there are a bunch of things that are very beneficial in prevention.
Okay, so the question is there a benefit of working?
So I just told, so I don't want to discuss my practice exam questions on YouTube. So if you do have a question, just email me.
Sure, thank you.
Okay. So I'm just going back to the chat now to go over the questions. Alcohol causes hypoglycemia. Can you explain how it causes increased A1C numbers? So are you, Atai, are you talking about like the falsely elevate one?
Yes.
Okay, so let's go to
It
that
falsely elevates A1C.
Okay. I believe it has, let's see. I believe it's had something to do with some sort of chemical reaction or something like that. I believe I talk about it in the chapter. Let's see.
It's in chapter 9.
Yeah. Alcoholism. So altered glycation. So it affects the, so remember how in the pathophysiology lectures I talk about how glucose needs time to bind to red blood cells, kind of like sugar on a donut. Alcohol seems to disrupt that process and then falsely elevate it.
Okay, so does alcohol then cause hyperglycemia?
It does, yes. So it falsely elevates, falsely is the key word, falsely elevates A1C. But for hypoglycemia, how it causes that is that your liver normally can turn glycogen into glucose so that you don't go low. But alcohol disrupts that process. Alcohol uses up, I believe it's like nicotinamide acetaldehyde acetate or something like that. It uses up some sort of cofactor in your liver so that your liver can't convert glycogen into glucose. And without your liver turning glycogen into glucose, then there's no way for you to kind of recover from a low. If your sugar is dropping, there's no way to kind of push it back up because your liver is the main source of conversion from glycogen back into glucose.
Yeah, so that means that's hypoglycemia. That's how alcohol causes hypoglycemia.
Correct.
Now, does
Atai,
alcohol?
I'll explain you. Esmond, will you allow me? Because
Sure.
I did this logic to me. So when you're consuming alcohol, the acute nature complication, as Esmond was explaining, due to the ability of body getting busy in the liver, digesting alcohol, is a hypoglycemia. But what in this table that I is a substance abuse, a person who is like alcoholic and who isn't having alcoholism for many, many years. That's more like a chronic alcoholism, which can increase the A1C because of the altered glycation mechanism. This is how I understood.
Perfect.
Yeah, I get that. Thank you very much. Now, my question, another question or same thing is, does alcohol in itself cause hyperglycemia?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Unless like, because alcohol itself turns into like acetaldehyde, so it doesn't actually break down into carbs. Unless,
maybe,
yeah.
Sorry, maybe the poor management associated with alcohol use would lead to hyperglycemia and DKA.
True. Like, depending whether you're talking acute or chronic, that's a really good point, Katie. Yes.
So it is possible for alcohol to lead to hyperglycemia.
Assuming like it's poor management and stuff like that, yes.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
So can we say because alcohol has, like, it has calories? I don't know.
So if you're drinking just pure alcohol, the alcohol just turns into carbs. But if you're saying let's say you're having a rum and Coke, well, the Coke has carbs, and the Coke might cause hyperglycemia.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm just gonna go back to the chat now. Let's see what other questions. Noella, oh yes, that's very nice of you, Noella. Thank you for those kind comments. Can you, okay, yeah, so that's where that waist circumference table was. Okay, Katie asked, do you recommend knowing both the brand name and common name? So no, in the exam nowadays, they give you both names actually. The first time I wrote it, they actually just gave you the chemical name, I believe. But nowadays they actually give you both, so you don't need to memorize both.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem, Katie. I know that's like, for a pharmacist, that one's easy, but it's totally unfair for like the dietitians and nurses, and I think I have a social worker once, and I think I have a physiotherapist this year. So yeah, but that's a great question, Katie. Okay. I noticed for hypo treatment. Okay, so Lauren asks, I noticed for hypo treatment, just one. Okay. Lauren asks, I noticed for hypo treatment in type 1 in children, if 10 years old, 15 grams, and it states, yeah. So that one's confusing too. Unfortunately, the problem with the guidelines is that they're all written by different people who didn't really seem to coordinate with one another. So there are little corner cases like this all over, where one source says one thing and another one says another thing. Yeah, it is. That is confusing. I don't know. I'm not sure how to answer that. It's just different parts of the guidelines say different things. And that's, yeah. I've complained to them before. I've written to the guideline committee saying, hey, do you know in 2 different places you're saying carbs are different? But I've never heard anything back. So sorry, I can't help you out with that, Lauren. If anyone here becomes part of the guideline committee, like, tell them about these things, that there's little small differences everywhere in the guidelines. I'll just skip that. Masa, if you do have a question, feel free to email me. can you confirm that Forxiga is only used for primary prevention for CV, not secondary prevention? Okay, so we can absolutely look at that. The answer is that it's actually used kind of neither, actually. So Jardiance, and so here you can take a look at a couple things. So this is the chapter, the update, and you can see here that, let me just zoom in a little bit. Sorry, with Zoom, there's like, you don't see them, but I have like a million buttons everywhere. Here it is. Okay, so you can see here that with the SGLT2s, for renal benefits, they've got all three cardiorenal benefits. But if you've actually got for prevention of CV, if you look at the outcomes, so in patients with ASCVD, you can see Forxiga does not actually show up here. You've got empagliflozin, which is Jardiance, and canagliflozin, which is Invokana. So with Forxiga, what they did was they did their studies 60% primary and then 30% secondary, but then they showed not significant benefit in either of them. With Jardiance, they did 100% secondary prevention and they showed a big benefit. For Invokana, they did 60%, around 66% secondary prevention, and they showed a big benefit. So for Forxiga, it's actually not for primary or for secondary, as you can see here. For primary prevention, actually, you would look here in adults age 60, older with at least 2 CV risk factors, but these are people who haven't had a CV event. It's actually the SGLT2s that have the most evidence for MACE.
So that I asked you that question, Desmond.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, like, so the thing is that I got I read over the guidelines like 100 times because I got confused. No, this section, because the DAPA-HF trial was done in people with only CV risk, but they weren't necessarily diabetic for heart failure. So it showed that it was really beneficial for heart failure. I mean, assuming, and they only had CV. So that's, I guess, oh, okay. I think I just answered my own question. Okay. I get it now. You know, I think I had to talk it out with somebody.
You know, sometimes that helps.
Yeah, so okay, so dapagliflozin probably wouldn't be your choice if you had to pick between the 3 SGLT2s. It would just be the Jardiance and Invokana.
Mostly, yes, so definitely, like, all the SGLT2s have benefit in heart failure, but MACE is a major adverse cardiovascular event. So we're talking about preventing a heart attack or a stroke. And Forxiga didn't have great evidence in doing either. It has good for heart failure. So that's why there's like all these different categories up here.
Well, it's really, I mean, I've learned a lot. And so even if I don't pass, which, I mean, I think I'm being pessimistic, but now I've noticed in practice, actually, that cardiologists are prescribing the dapagliflozin, and they don't have diabetes. So it's pretty cool for heart failure.
So that's another, that goes into the congestive heart failure guidelines, which is, you've already have enough guidelines to deal with. But yes, SGLT2s are now one of the bedrock medications for heart failure.
Yeah.
But that's a great question, Kasia.
Thank you. Yeah.
And if you're talking about DAPA, so my question about Forxiga and bladder cancer is still there on guideline.
Yes, so it's still there in the guidelines, but the product monograph was updated a long time ago. So I think I mentioned it on my sheet that you don't.
Yes, you mentioned. But if different people wrote it and still there, I don't know what if would be question like this. Should be follow guidelines, or we should follow new information.
You would follow the new information in this case.
Okay.
Yeah. Perfect. Okay, so I'm just gonna go back to the chat now and just seeing new message. Okay, so Katie has some messages about the carbohydrate. Yes, it is kind of confusing. Okay, yeah, it is confusing, unfortunately. Okay, Sonia, last question. Do GLP and GLP fixed dose mixed analogs have same side effects? Okay, so there's GLP-1s like lexizanatide, adalimumab, which is not very popular, and then there's these combos like Soliqua that's the GLP-1 plus insulin. So in terms do they have the same side effects? Yes, like because it's just both of those put into one medication. So because it still has insulin, it still has the potential for lows. If it's the GLP-1, it still has stomach side effects.
Thank you, Esmond.
No problem. Oh my gosh, it's like 6:06 already. Geez, that went by so quickly. Yeah. Yeah, one more question, sure.
Yeah, sorry. So, this is like that discrepancy thing that we're talking about, but this is literally within the guideline itself. So if you look at the nutrition chapter, in the body of the chapter, it says that carbohydrates should be 45 to 65% proportion of your diet, and then protein is 10 to 35%.
Oh, I think I know which one you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the fat is 20 to 35, but then if you go to the recommendation, it's the 45 to 60, 10 to 25, and so which one do you follow? Because they're like contradictory, or like not but they're different.
They are different. So actually, if you look closely, I believe, okay, let me try to find it. One of them actually says it's actually just for chronic disease.
Oh.
And the other one's specific to diabetes. So let me just try to find it. I know that has come out before too. Let me try to find it.
Yeah, right. So in the actual body, they're talking about chronic disease.
Yes, one of them says chronic disease, and the other one is actually specific to diabetes. So yeah. But yeah, but that's a good question. That confused a lot of other people too. That's how I know the answer right away.
Okay, so we should follow the recommendation obviously for diabetics.
Correct, yes. Unless it says for chronic disease.
Okay.
Okay, perfect. So Empan, just to answer your question lastly, it's August 1st that everyone loses. So you have, like, I'm gonna assume all of you go pass, but if you don't pass, you need to let me know by July 31st. That's when everything ends. At the end of July 31st, that's when the website shuts down for updates. That's when you need to email me by if you want to get a refund. But let's think positively and think that none of you will need to do that. I have taken tomorrow off. So if you do have more questions, feel free to put them in the exam form and I'll answer them quite quickly. And I do have another Q&A tomorrow if you have more questions. But thank you for all your great questions. I wish you the best of luck on the exam. And yeah, have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Esmond. Amazing.
No problem.
Have a great evening. Bye.
See ya.
Thank you, Esmond.
Thank you.
No problem. See ya.
Okay, thank you so much. Bye.
No problem, Nikolai.
Thank you, Esmond.
No
You've
problem.
been very kind. Thank you.
Oh, no problem. No problem. Best of luck on the exam.
Thank you.